Living in medieval Europe meant inhabiting an environment where biological decay was not episodic but structural. Between roughly the 6th and 15th centuries, European towns and villages developed without enclosed sewage systems, without systematic waste removal, and without any understanding of microbial contamination. Archaeological excavations in cities such as London, York, Paris, and Cologne consistently reveal street layers dating from the medieval period, composed of compacted organic waste, sometimes exceeding 30% of total volume. These layers include human feces, animal dung, decomposing food remains, straw bedding, ash from hearths, and the bodies of rodents and birds. Instead of being removed, waste was repeatedly leveled and built over, creating streets that functioned as slow anaerobic compost. This was not accidental neglect. Municipal records from medieval London show repeated ordinances ordering residents to clean streets, followed by immediate failure due to lack of infrastructure and enforcement capacity. The result was permanent accumulation. Homes amplified this process. Most medieval dwellings were constructed from wattle and daub, untreated timber, and thatch, materials that actively retain moisture. Packed earth floors covered with straw absorbed bodily fluids, spilled food, and animal waste. In many households, this straw was replaced only once or twice a year. Microbiological analysis of preserved medieval floor deposits reveals dense fungal and bacterial colonies associated with long-term organic decomposition. Houses did not isolate decay from human life. They trapped it. Air quality compounded the damage. For much of the medieval period, chimneys were uncommon, particularly among lower classes. Fires burned continuously for cooking and heating, releasing smoke laden with fine particulate matter. Experimental reconstructions of pre-industrial indoor environments demonstrate particulate concentrations many times higher than modern health limits. Chronic exposure to wood smoke is now known to cause long-term lung inflammation, reduced oxygen exchange, and systemic effects on cardiovascular and neurological function. This was not acute oxygen deprivation, but chronically elevated carbon dioxide and persistent smoke exposure acting as a long-term physiological stressor. Medieval Europeans experienced this exposure from infancy to death. Water sources offered no relief. Wells were shallow and frequently contaminated by nearby latrines. Rivers served as drinking sources and waste channels simultaneously. Excavations of medieval wells show high nitrate levels consistent with fecal pollution. Boiling water was not routine practice. Alcoholic beverages such as ale were safer only because fermentation suppressed some pathogens, not because water itself was clean. Chronic gastrointestinal disease was endemic, contributing to malnutrition and immune weakness. Food preservation slowed but did not halt decay. Grain stores routinely developed mold infestations. One fungus, ergot, thrived in damp medieval conditions and produced alkaloids capable of causing convulsions, hallucinations, and tissue necrosis. Major ergot outbreaks are documented, including episodes in the 11th and 12th centuries associated with mass illness. Bread was often consumed after visible mold was removed rather than discarded. Meat was eaten after surface rot was cut away. These practices were normal, not desperate exceptions. The human body bore the cumulative cost. Osteological studies of medieval skeletal populations show high prevalence of periosteal lesions, indicating chronic infection, widespread dental abscesses, and evidence of childhood growth disruption. Life expectancy at birth was low, not because adults universally died young, but because bodies were weakened early and never fully recovered. Even survivors carried lifelong physiological damage. Major historical events intensified but did not create these conditions. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, caused by sustained cold and rainfall, led to widespread crop failure and mass starvation across northern Europe. Mortality soared, but the famine did not introduce decay into medieval life. It revealed how close populations already lived to biological collapse. 2 decades later, the Black Death devastated Europe, killing an estimated 30 to 50% of the population. Yet even this catastrophe spread through environments already primed by filth, crowding, and weakened bodies. The most disturbing reality is not that medieval Europe suffered periodic disasters. It is that, for centuries before and after those events, ordinary life unfolded inside conditions of constant biological stress. Decay was not an emergency. It was the environment in which civilization functioned. Human bodies adapted enough to survive, but never enough to thrive. And that slow, normalized damage is the part history rarely confronts directly. Sleep in medieval Europe was not a period of recovery. It was a biological pause that rarely restored the body to baseline. Most people slept in shared spaces, often several individuals in the same room. sometimes in the same bed, with animals nearby for warmth. Mattresses were made of straw, hay, or rags that retained moisture and organic matter. Bedding was infrequently cleaned. Parasites, such as lice, fleas, and bedbugs, were ubiquitous, confirmed by archaeological findings of insect remains in medieval textiles and sleeping areas. These parasites did not simply cause irritation. Repeated nocturnal biting disrupts sleep cycles and triggers stress responses in the nervous system. Modern sleep science shows that uninterrupted deep sleep is essential for tissue repair, immune regulation, and hormone balance. Medieval sleeping conditions made such sleep rare. Noise from crowded households, animals, street activity, and nearby workshops continued through the night. Light from hearth fires and candles altered circadian rhythms. Cold and damp penetrated walls and bedding. The body remained partially alert even during rest, never fully disengaging from environmental threat. Chronic sleep disruption has measurable physiological consequences. It elevates cortisol levels, suppresses immune function, and impairs tissue regeneration. Medieval Europeans lived under these conditions continuously, not episodically. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, does not simply spike during danger. When elevated chronically, it reshapes metabolism, increases muscle breakdown, slows wound healing, and contributes to long-term fatigue. Although medieval people did not name cortisol, their bodies lived under its influence. Historical records indirectly confirm this biological strain. Medieval medical texts frequently describe persistent weakness, wasting, and inability to recover strength after illness or injury. These descriptions align closely with modern understandings of chronic stress and sleep deprivation. Recovery was not expected. Decline was normalized. Major historical crises amplified these conditions. During the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, prolonged cold and rainfall destroyed crops across northern Europe. Food scarcity combined with already compromised sleep and immune systems led to mass mortality. Contemporary chronicles describe populations too weak to work, too exhausted to travel, and unable to recover even when food briefly became available. This was not sudden collapse. It was the tipping point of bodies already operating at minimal reserve. The Black Death further exposed the consequences of chronic physiological stress. When plague arrived in the late 1340s, it encountered populations weakened by decades of malnutrition, disrupted sleep, and constant infection. Mortality rates were not uniform. The poor, crowded, and physically exhausted died in far greater numbers. This pattern reflects the role of baseline health rather than exposure alone. Bodies without recovery capacity failed faster. Sleep deprivation also affects cognition and emotional regulation. Modern neuroscience shows that inadequate sleep reduces impulse control, increases irritability, and impairs long-term planning. Medieval societies functioned with populations experiencing these effects as a baseline condition. Decision-making was shaped by fatigue. Emotional resilience was limited. The nervous system prioritized immediate survival over abstract reasoning. Children born into medieval Europe inherited this physiological environment. Developmental stress markers found in skeletal remains indicate that growth disruption was widespread. Poor sleep quality during childhood has long-term consequences for brain development, immune function, and physical stature. These children did not recover in adulthood. The damage accumulated. The most unsettling aspect of medieval sleep is not its discomfort, but its role in preventing recovery. The body relies on sleep to reverse daily damage. When sleep itself becomes another source of stress, damage compounds. Muscles repair incompletely. Inflammation persists. Hormonal balance never stabilizes. Life becomes a slow downward adjustment rather than a cycle of strain and renewal. Medieval Europe did not consist of healthy people occasionally struck by hardship. It consisted of bodies that rarely reached full function and then endured additional stress on top of that compromised state. Sleep did not reset the system. It merely allowed survival to continue one more day. This is the core horror rarely acknowledged. The medieval body was not overwhelmed by singular catastrophes alone. It was shaped by a lifetime without true recovery. Civilization advanced while human biology quietly deteriorated beneath it. Pain in medieval Europe was not an event that arrived and left. It was a continuous physical condition that most bodies carried quietly for years. Skeletal analyses from medieval burial sites across England, France, Germany, and Scandinavia show widespread evidence of chronic inflammation, joint degeneration, untreated fractures, and advanced dental disease. These findings indicate not isolated injuries but long-term bodily wear. Osteoarthritis appears in medieval skeletons at ages that would be considered premature today, often beginning in early adulthood. Dental abscesses, visible as bone lesions around tooth roots, are present in a majority of adult remains, suggesting persistent infection and ongoing pain that was never resolved. Modern medicine understands chronic pain as a neurological condition as much as a physical one. When pain signals persist without relief, the nervous system adapts by altering how pain is processed. Sensitivity can either increase or, more commonly under constant exposure, become blunted. Medieval bodies likely existed in this blunted state. Pain did not disappear. It became background noise. This neurological accommodation allowed people to function, but at a significant cost. When the brain reduces responsiveness to pain signals, it also reduces sensitivity to other bodily warnings, including fatigue, illness, and injury severity. This adaptation is visible indirectly in historical records. Medieval medical texts frequently describe conditions that linger, return, or never fully leave. Treatments focused on balancing humors rather than eliminating causes, resulting in temporary relief at best. Chronic ulcers, joint pain, and weakness are described as normal states of aging rather than medical failures. The expectation was not cure. It was endurance. The nervous system under constant strain also reshapes emotional experience. Contemporary neuroscience shows that chronic physical pain and chronic inflammation alter neurotransmitter systems involved in mood regulation. Persistent inflammation increases the risk of depression and emotional flattening. Medieval people did not have language for these conditions, but behavioral patterns reflect them. Historical sources describe communities characterized by fatalism, short planning horizons, and acceptance of hardship as inevitable. These are not purely cultural traits. They align closely with populations living under sustained physiological stress. Touch itself would have carried different meaning. Skin conditions such as fungal infections, ulcers, and parasites were common. Clothing, often damp and coarse, irritated the body continuously. The sensation of comfort was rare. The nervous system learns quickly when relief is unavailable. It lowers expectations. It stops seeking states that cannot be reached. This neurological resignation is one of the most damaging adaptations of all, because it removes the internal drive toward well-being. Children growing up in medieval Europe were exposed to this environment from birth. Skeletal evidence shows enamel hypoplasia, a marker of developmental stress, in a significant proportion of remains. These disruptions reflect periods of illness, malnutrition, or physiological strain during childhood. Modern research shows that early life stress permanently alters pain perception, stress responses, and emotional regulation. Medieval children entered adulthood already neurologically shaped by hardship. There was no later correction. Large-scale events intensified but did not define this reality. During the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, widespread starvation exacerbated chronic pain and weakness. Contemporary accounts describe people unable to stand, work, or travel, not because of acute injury, but because their bodies were already exhausted. The famine did not create suffering from nothing. It stripped away the thin margin that had allowed bodies to function at all. The Black Death further demonstrated how fragile medieval bodies were. Many did not die instantly. They endured days of intense pain, fever, and organ failure. Bodies already accustomed to chronic discomfort lacked resilience. When acute catastrophe arrived, there was little reserve left. The most unsettling aspect of medieval pain is not its severity, but its invisibility. Chronic pain does not scream. It persists quietly. When entire populations live with it, it becomes culturally invisible. Pain becomes character. Endurance becomes virtue. Suffering is reframed as normal life. This normalization shaped medieval civilization profoundly. Societies were built by people who rarely experienced physical ease. Labor systems, social expectations, and moral frameworks developed around bodies assumed to be tired, sore, and compromised. Human limits were accepted as fixed because no alternative had been experienced. The deepest horror is not that medieval people suffered. It is that their nervous systems adapted so completely that suffering stopped being recognized as a condition worth questioning. Pain did not signal that something was wrong. It signaled that life was continuing as expected. Civilization advanced on top of this adaptation. Cities grew. Institutions stabilized. History moved forward. All while the human body operated in a narrowed range of sensation, resilience, and hope. The cost was not paid in dramatic moments of collapse alone. It was paid every day, in quiet, persistent bodily strain that shaped what it meant to be human.